special award, because I have a feeling she's going to give it every time. Maybe more than one.
She's gonna give the next one, because I'm getting tired already.
More than one per session.
We're working together, but it's great for me because I'm learning too.
That's a good point.
What would you rather do on a Friday
Jason, what
when
do you
it's
think about
65 degrees
that?
outside?
I just want to say one thing. Jason would be the person, you know, tell students, don't leave in the back, come up front. Jason needs in the back. I don't know, what would they do? And on a Friday you're in, Jason. On a Friday. You're becoming to be more and more administrative. I want to let you know that. That's not it.
Do you remember Chris Jackson?
Yeah.
He said nice things.
Yeah, well, you know how much I have to pay him? Me or him? We may, well, I'll tell you a funny story later, because I don't want to tell you. It's, see?
I'm gonna stay in my office and log in.
No, I'm gonna go to it. Did you see how quick it went up in my memories? She woke up and said, please fix it. So I have an email them to you. I didn't get one. I'm up to yesterday now. You done today?
Yeah. Like an hour ago.
Oh, I found it.
Oh, okay, we're up.
We're ready?
Oh, we're up.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming to our second session. Exchange, this is on Standard 2, Ethics and Integrity. So I think a couple of you were at the initial session, but for those of you who weren't, just a real quick kind of recap of what this is. So Middle States standards have changed. They're now 7 instead of 14. Starting in the fall, we're going to be,
Feedback?
sorry, starting in the fall, we're going to start our self-study, which is all hands on deck. Everybody's going to be involved. So we're using the spring to sort of review each of the standards, kind of just come together as a university, talk about them in terms of what do they mean for us, what are some of our strengths in these areas, where are some areas for opportunity. Now each of the new standards have very specific criteria. You may remember the last ones, Andy, I think you were involved in the last one. It was kind of sort of loose, right? There was a lot of verbiage about how you sort of could meet the standards, characteristics of excellence. Now the criteria are very specific and we have to hit each and every one of them. So what we wanted to do is take some of them from each of the standards that we think are not obvious or evident. Go through them, kind of discuss them, as I said, what are some of our successes, what types of evidence can we use to demonstrate, and what are areas of opportunity. So let's look at the standard first overall. Ethics and integrity. Ethics and integrity are central, indispensable, and defining hallmarks of effective higher education institutions. In all activities, whether internal or external, an institution must be faithful to its mission, honor its contracts and commitments, adhere to its policies, and represent itself truthfully. So, just real quickly, first thoughts about what that standard means for NJCU? Overall, before we get into criteria, any initial thoughts? Okay, it's pretty broad. We'll go into individual criteria. So one is climate for diversity. Climate that fosters respect for those from a range of diverse backgrounds, ideas, and perspectives. So what do you think that this means for us in terms of NJCU? What are some of our successes related to this criterion?
I think we have a very, very diverse student body.
Okay.
I think we have a diverse faculty and staff, although it could become even more diverse to match the student body or to get closer to the student body. We allow people from to a certain extent, people from different ends of the spectrum to come in, do presentations, things like that. We hold cultural events. We invite the community in for those cultural events. So those are just some things that
Okay. So, does everybody hear that? Diversity in terms of faculty, staff, and maybe more so students, and just in some of the ideas that we allow to be brought into the university. Other thoughts? Okay, how would we demonstrate our success in this area? So some of the things might make sense. We could talk about the distribution of our faculty, staff, and students in terms of race and ethnicity. Other ways we could demonstrate?
you can demonstrate the different kinds of workshop. I mean, I'm not sure how far this goes, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, but you could probably pull from the record the different kinds of activities that we've had, the different workshops, the different speakers, the different times our community involvement was, you know.
So that's an interesting question. Do you think that if we were to go back 5 years till now, do you think there'd be any difference in terms of the patterns? Have we been pretty consistent in this criteria? Or have we done better, worse?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I mean, the first word that comes to my head is we've been pretty consistent,
Okay,
but I'm not sure without looking at stats.
all right. And any areas that you think that we could improve on this? Any concerns about our ability to meet this criterion? So Andy's brought out a lot of things in terms of activities that we've done. Do we have any evidence that actually fosters respect for those? It's kind of an indirect measure. Do we have anything that would be more direct in terms of?
You looking at towards respect?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out, I think what you said is good, and I didn't mean to indicate, but I'm trying to think from a reviewer's standpoint. There's a lot of things that you do, but would there be anything that would be counter to that?
When you say counter to that, I'm not sure what you mean by counter.
Would there be any indications that, any instances of things that we would need to address where things might not have gone perfect?
I think depending on who they talk to, they're gonna probably get some feedback, because I've been in different communities. They're gonna get some feedback that even though they're attempting to diversify staff, and by staff I mean faculty and staff,
Okay.
they still have a way to go on that. So that might be one area in which the university can continue to improve.
Okay.
I think in this current political climate, because we're still very a liberal institution and a very liberal state, but I can almost see where one can make the argument that arguments and discussion of people on the right of the spectrum, the political spectrum, are not really presented as much as people on ideas from the right. So that might be something, but they're gonna probably be as liberal as us in the document.
Does that-
It's a thought, especially these days.
Anybody else see that?
What do you think, Jason? Sorry.
Still processing? Ethan, any thoughts on Virginia?
A couple things come to mind, I think just because of where I work. So Dr. Henderson has a President's Diversity Council that she's doing, so people that are on it, they kind of know. I think they're trying to spread out what, the work they're doing. So looking at, the faculty or staff that come in and making sure it's diversified, or I know that's one thing with HR, doing, working with student affairs and having activities and just looking at just overall the different areas on campus to make sure it's diversified. So I think that's one thing.
Does the President's Diversity Council have a set of goals that
Yes,
are
they're
well known? Could we?
I don't think that. I think that it can be more so. I just
Okay.
got involved in it, and I'll be heading it up shortly, so I think I'll be a lot more involved in it. But I think that's something that could be, expanded express more on the work that we're doing and the areas that we're looking at, but it is comprised of like faculty, staff, and students, so I think the different involvement, and the group is diverse, so that does help, just what we're trying to achieve, in the committee.
So I want to go, I think that'll be a critical thing in terms of communication, getting everybody
and
aware.
even perhaps getting it on the web, what work we're doing, things like that.
I also want to follow up, you said, so you think that one area that we could do better on is in terms of recruitment and hiring faculty and also staff in terms of diversity. I don't know if, are you involved in any faculty searches or anything like that? Are there any going on in your areas? So you don't have any insight as to, are we doing different things with recruitment in terms of, haven't done any recently? Okay.
I know that one thing I know.
Yes.
In these different meetings, I know that the provost is extremely interested in doing that.
Okay.
But I also know that some faculty and administrators still feel the statistics, we have a way to go.
Okay.
And even in the little issue of if the person, how many blacks, whites, et cetera, what some people would argue is that blacks, sometimes you could show you like 20 blacks, but how many of them are really African Americans versus Caribbean, Haitian, that kind of thing. So they're looking at really subtle distinctions that perhaps some other people are not really looking at because they're not thinking in terms of that.
I think too, as our international population increases, that may have some impact on our diversity, and just where they're coming from.
Excellent.
But are we listed somewhere as being like one of the most diverse? Because it's up there. on the site.
US
Yeah, we
News.
are,
So
yeah.
take the pictures, put it in.
Yeah, US News, but that is for our student body.
Yeah. For student body, right?
Okay, yeah, but that's something.
No, it is. And actually, Jersey City is, I think, the most, didn't it just come out, the most diverse
Well, I
in the,
think that's,
in the?
I mean, even that, we have an advantage over, because we are in, aside from New York, we are in one of the most diverse areas. So we have that advantage for us.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, so this is one of the ones that we'll have to address, and I think that we have a good start on this. Next criteria, grievance policy. Okay. Grievance policy is documented and disseminated to address complaints or grievances raised by students, faculty, or staff. The institution's policies are fair and impartial. Sure, grievances are addressed promptly, appropriately, and equitably. And then there's another sub-criterion, if you will, for student complaints specifically. We're required to have kind of a longitudinal analysis of complaints and evidence that if we see any patterns, that those have been sort of addressed. I know our successes in this criterion. I don't know if Ethan, are you on this? Are you on any committees in the Senate? Wasn't one of the Senate committees looking at grievance, or maybe Jason, wasn't one of them?
Yeah.
Do you know where
There
they?
is a form that, yeah, that's been created and is up for consideration. I don't think it's been finalized.
I don't think the grievance goes through the Senate. I think it's a separate committee. It's a university.
Weren't you looking at though? Weren't they looking at some kind of process for this?
They were looking at the grievance of grades.
Oh, that's it. Very
That was
narrowly defined.
primarily what they looked at. It was a fairly narrow. During discussion, they were looking at possibly expanding it, but there is a policy. There's just a few flaws in the policy, especially as it relates to, for instance, adjunct faculty who might not be around at all after the end of the semester, which can cause real problems if things have to be done by a certain time after the grade is assigned. And that's what the policy that's been going through the Senate has been looking at,
Oh, so the
is trying to take care of that so that the students don't get hung out to dry by this time crunch, if
Got
you
it.
will.
okay, all right. But it wasn't broader. It wasn't all.
I think it's going to eventually become broader, but that's primarily what they were looking at, is that academic grievance.
Okay. So the academic grievance policy I know is in the catalog. Are folks familiar with other grievance policies? Just
Would it make any sense to, when you're gathering the data for this, to speak to Max, who works with the provost, specifically on, in the sense, I guess you call it labor relations?
got it?
And then also, unless this is too controversial, to me, heads of your unions, because if anybody knows about grievances, it would be Max. And maybe the provost would be interested, but we probably have Max talk for him. In terms of the student complaints,
Mm-hmm.
I know, I get a sense that the president is very much engaged.
Right.
And if a student calls up, bam, you know, she's really interested. But beyond that, Karen Morgan with the whole student success, and not just Karen, I mean the whole
The
organization.
EAB thing?
I think they've done a number of focus groups, have spoken to people, and really trying to figure out what are some of the students' concerns, and then try to address it. Anything from academic advisement, registration, you name it. So I mean, I think that when you put this together is a very strong component, that there was a need for it, the need is being addressed, and then you'll do it.
Excellent. So you say we have successes, and it sounds like you have come up with some things that we can use to, but ideas that we could use to demonstrate.
I'm aware of
it.
that, yes.
Okay. And also maybe what the Senate's doing could be in terms of evidence. Any areas where you think we have of opportunity here to do better?
I think sometimes, people, well, students, just because they call our office, they don't really know the process. So sometimes they'll come up and, you know, they're like, well, we wanna, speak with the president, and they'll be in the middle of a grievance, and they don't understand that they can't really speak to the president until the grievance has been resolved, and it's not really an a presidential decision, but more of an academic thing. So I think that there might need to be more communication about how the process is in terms of filing a grievance and, you know, the steps and, I guess even the time frame, because sometimes things can just take long and, you know.
That's good.
So Ethan, do you know, or Jason, do you know if there's any, is what the Senate's looking at in terms of grade grievances, is it more just a workflow thing, not?
It's mostly trying to clarify the policy that's already in place and then modify some of the dates and times by which it occurs. Mainly what went to the Senate floor was an edited version of the form that's already in place.
Where are those forms? Okay. But that would be a good way to maybe look at a longitudinal.
I think they're supposed to be in the student handbook.
Yes, yeah.
I'm talking about when if we have a central repository for those forms, we could definitely do a longitudinal.
Yeah, I don't know where they wind up.
I guess this is good for me because I was sort of under the impression that the Senate was looking at digitizing that process so that.
There was some talk about that, but that didn't go very far yet.
Okay.
And I think even this discussion also helps to clarify certain things, like who's working on what in terms of, is it the Senate, is it the university, which body is handling it, and the process, which is also evident as to why students call us, because I think sometimes that just the policy itself or how it's handled isn't very clear. So if we are confused about it, I can't even imagine our students, you know, just how, you know, so I think that's something, if we take anything out of this, you know, like we gotta look at maybe the policy needs to be looked at.
Right. And it does seem like the Senate's looking at only the student component, not the faculty or staff or any kind of those kinds of grievances or student complaints in another regard. All right. Any other thoughts on this one? We have two more criteria to talk about. Employees, fair and impartial practices in the hiring, evaluation, promotion, discipline, and separation of employees. Strengths. You can talk, Andy.
This one's too political. I mean, I talk too much, Frank can tell you. This is a political hot potato.
Okay.
I refuse to get bogged down. Let somebody else do the talk. Let a full-time tenured faculty person talk. You already knows.
No. Okay, let's confine it to faculty. Promotion, tenure, understandable.
See, look at
Let's see, tenure. There's some debate about how clear the promotion guidelines, criteria actually are right now.
Okay.
I know at least in some of the non-tenured faculty, there is the impression that the goalposts are being moved within an academic year and between academic years while still trying to achieve the tenure. So,
Okay.
being on the other side of it, I haven't paid as much attention to it. But some of the complaints sound like if what they're being told at different times is true, then the goalposts may be being moved
Midstream.
midstream and possibly in one case between when they had to start filing for retention and when retention decisions were made for a given year.
And you don't have a sense of whether that's a,
I don't know if it's a
Pervasive.
communication issue or if with the moving in of a new dean or trying to establish stricter criteria for the procedures, if people are just getting caught in the way stream or what.
or maybe even just clarifying what does exist, kind of
Or
what,
ex-
yeah, what.
Yeah.
Okay. Jason, have you heard anything, or do you have, how many untenured folks do you have in your department? None, so it might not be as big a.
Oh, one.
Sorry.
1.5.
Do I want to ask what the half is?
Joint
Oh, joint appointment, okay. Have you heard any strengths and/or areas for improvement?
No, I think there's an effort to clarify expectations.
So Andy,
Yes.
or Frank, in terms of promotion of within your unit, do you think that your staff members have a good awareness of what's required for promotion?
I think at times, these last couple of years have been a transitionary period in which there have been slight changes in policies. And I think everybody really does, the people that I know, really do attempt to, in good faith, create that dynamic. What might be interesting for you or someone to do, with both grievances and everything, I'd be curious, is the knowledge of policy in arts and sciences the same as in education, is the same in business? Are we all on the same page? Or are we telling people slightly different things? And, that's again a communication issue. Now, if it turns out that everybody's on the same page with everything, I think that would be a very good sign to show them. I think if, on the other hand, it's not, I think that would be a very good sign to let them know, hey, look what we found, and this is how we're going to take care of it.
That's great.
That's what I would recommend. Because I know, even with the one meeting I was at, that's why I said that there was a whole lot of discussion. There was a difference of opinion from one dean to someone higher up. And the question was whether, and I'm sure it got resolved, but the fact that it was even questioned seems to indicate that there may just be something.
I want to attend the meetings you attend.
No, you don't.
Correct. But that's a really good suggestion. Other suggestions or thoughts about Andy's approach? Okay, last one. This is, I think, an incredibly interesting one. When I first thought, I thought, this doesn't mesh with the other ones in terms of integrity and ethics. But then, as I thought more, and Frank, I don't know if you want to speak to this in terms of its place in the ethics standard or in terms of what we as an institution do in this regard?
Well, in a theoretical thing, it would be interesting to say, does the institution do things that causes students to have to make poor financial decisions because of policies or practices and things like that. What is the short-term and long-term ramifications?
So, sort of an audit of our policies from this kind of perspective.
Yeah, I mean, are there things that those?
It's interesting.
I mean, I think those things are, I think the services and programs are in place to help students understand the funding and sources, options. I mean, the other thing, value received for costs, methods to make informed decisions on incurring debt. I mean, that's, how do you teach a student that? How do you teach, good financial practices, that go beyond, here, kind of general things. So sort of do we have, if you kind of go back to ethics and integrity, it's, are we doing things to students that are forcing them to take out more loans?
It's interesting.
Then, might be required to read, or, do we leave students in limbo, because we are looking for something else, looking for enrollment, because that forces students to be in limbo in their financial picture because we can't make a decision.
Interesting. And
As
when,
I said, this is all theoretical.
Jason?
Do we have information on when students submit their FAFSA? Because if they submit by March 1st, right, they get the best consideration for financial aid. But I don't know whether or not that's known.
Tracked.
And that might be a good data point.
Oh, yeah, we do find that out.
And I think there've been campaigns to try to increase, as Jason says, to try to increase the extent to which students file. Is that filing early or filing on time? That's filing early?
Filing on time.
Yeah, early is great,
Early.
I would take.
Yeah.
And doing it accurately.
Or I would say filing it in enough time for the rest of the processes to take place. So, so I think.
So Jason, in terms of data point, you think that would be something that we could even maybe look at over time, since I know this is an initiative that you guys have been working on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant work in progress.
So I know you have financial aid TV,
Yes.
and that is, correct me if I'm wrong, but on-demand kind of short videos for students with questions that I believe is tailored specifically to NJCU issues, if there are any. General when they're generic, but if there's anything specific to us?
We haven't developed any specific NJCU videos. We have, the videos themselves are sort of broken down into segments. So we're talking about, how do I file my FAFSA, what's my state aid, so it helps, they're very much broken down into different categories.
And are there any that kind of address this sort of,
There's not a lot on it that right now has financial literacy, other than make a budget, things like that, so it's not really strong on that.
is anybody familiar with Gen Ed? Isn't there a financial literacy class in the Gen Ed program? No? Okay.
I know we sometimes have presenters come in to do workshops
In your area or in
in our
general?
area, and I think other areas as well, but I don't know if there's a course per se. I think it's more people coming from, in fact, from the state. Talking about everything, I mean, not only tuition fees, financial aid, but credit cards, incurring huge debt and things like that.
Okay. Do you think that students, I'm hopeful that students will attend some of these sessions, so I don't want to speak for them, but do you think this is an issue for students in your experience with them? Do they seem to need this kind of? Yes.
I do, I think, only because, it just so recently, we had a situation where a student came needing assistance with tuition.
Mm-hmm.
And, we said, well, let's see what we could do to help. And after we looked at the student's account, they didn't have a balance on their account, so I wasn't sure whether it needed a scholarship. However, what ended up happening was that the student took out a graduate type of loan that had a very high interest, which was not advised by whoever advised her, because it is probably one of the highest ones, and ended up taking out more than they needed. And, you know, it could have been because of financial reasons, and I, you know, I get it, I get that. But then I had to explain to the student, well, you understand that we can't give you a scholarship because you have no balance to pay. So we can't give you a scholarship just in your name. You now have a balance with your loan, but we can't pay your loan for you. So then she was confused at first, but I said, there's nothing we can do because the loan's in your name. And then I had to explain, well, if you needed a scholarship, it should have been before you actually took out the loans. So I think that I don't know if she just didn't understand the whole process or what. I do know that she was advised not to take out that type of loan because it was high interest and so forth, but after the fact she needed help.
I think the good news is that our students are very loan conscious.
Okay.
And I think to the point where, you know, they don't want to take out any loans to pay their bill, even a federal student loan. Even though you could make an argument that there's value in taking out the loan now and paying it back over time, especially if you graduate. I kind of think students are very loan conscious. They're conscious that they want this education to be as debt-free as, well, or they want it to be debt-free, or they want it to be as debt-free as possible. So I think in some ways with financial literacy, the students are sort of practicing it because they're saying, listen, I want this to be something where it's not going to be a long-term financial commitment to me. Because if it's got a lot of student loans, then this becomes long-term financial commitment.
I think this was a unique situation because I've never heard something like that. The student happened to be an international student. So I just think that it was just a misunderstanding.
Yeah,
but I felt bad after the fact because I was just like, there really is nothing we can do to help you.
But she'll know for the next year.
She'll know for the next time, yeah.
That's good.
So what I'm hearing is a couple of things. You mentioned the debt-free, which I think is probably something that's maybe helps inadvertently with the financial literacy as we talk to people about what that means and that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting. And Andy, you mentioned a way that we could sort of get an understanding about promotion and people's awareness of promotion and those kind of criteria. We might want to do something here since Virginia and Frank have had differing kind of experiences. And you said yours may be a one-off, but it may not be. So that could be some initial data that we get in terms of how are we doing on this criteria. Anything else?
I mean, I think it should be also, not only do the students learn when they see Frank's folks, they learn if they're OSP or SEND students from our campuses during the summer. They learn in the fall because there's a whole bunch of workshops that always are there for them. I find that one of the biggest problems with our students is that they have a tendency, and they have a tendency to put off and put off and put off. And then you ask, why didn't you do it? Why didn't you do it? We told you many times to do it. And they don't really have a strong answer. And then what that means is that the student may be too late to get financial aid. So that's one issue. The other issue, and this, I don't see a way around it, I don't know if it's financial literacy or more ethics, is that for affluent students, or even middle income students, their parents probably could afford things like the dorm and things like that. We have a population, generally speaking, many of whom are on financial aid. Certainly our population is real, I mean, they wouldn't get into our program unless it's like low income. And then what happens is they really want to be in the dorm for a whole variety of reasons. And you want them to be in the dorm because you want to make them happy, you want to make the bursar's office happy, you want to make everybody happy. But the reality is maybe 50% will graduate after 5 years. And if they're going to be in the dormitory, not only will they very often have to take, in fact, almost always have to take out loans, in many cases their parents, who don't have that much money to begin with, have to take out loans. I think this is across the state of New Jersey. I don't think it's just at NJCU. I think the president is trying to remedy it with some of the programs that she's instilled, especially for freshmen. But, I mean, ultimately, I think one has to really look at that and say, what are we doing? If we're talking about hopefully getting the students out of here with huge debt,
That's good, yeah.
especially if only 50% graduate before.
Which we do well with the debt that our students have now, those that graduate, in terms of, you have some?
No, yeah, I was gonna say, that's really interesting that you say that, because I think that when you think of the dorm students, I think they might work better more for international students. Just because they don't have family here and things like that. But there are students that just wanna live in the dorms because they don't wanna live at home, or they do have a long commute and so forth. But, you know, it is a big financial, you know, addition to their tuition with the dorms. And, you know, we have some really, like, I've had a situation where we had a student, I mean, when I tell you the student is involved in like every organization, great grades and everything, and they are an international student, out-of-state student, I'm sorry, living here with a relative. The relative gets a new job, goes out of state, and now the student's left with, in the middle of their semester, and nowhere to live. Like, the person had like a month to figure out where to go. And, you know, we figured out how to help the person. But in situations like that, you know, we had a great student with great grades. If we didn't figure out how to help the student, we would have lost the student.
That's right.
But, you know, for the family, it is a financial burden because they couldn't afford it. So they figured out how to help the student. And then my advice was, okay, now you need to apply for an RA position and maybe get free, you know, housing for the following year. But, you know, in some instances like that, like, you know, it's tough because you have students that really want to be here, that do well, but can't afford it. And sometimes if we didn't step in to help in this instance, we would have lost a good student.
Well, it's a hard balance, I think, because, you know, students who are on campus are engaged more and have more
Yeah.
the tendency to finish off. But as you said, right, it's a,
It is, but financially being able to afford it, whether for them or their family, yeah, it's an expense.
it's very,
And if at some point, see, very often what happens with parents, and I've watched it, is the parents love their kids. They want to do everything for their kids. I'm going to give you what I never got, blah, 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 blah. Go ahead, I'll take out a loan. That's good for 1 year.
Yeah.
By the time the second year comes in, reality comes in, or can't do it anymore, you lose the student.
You lose the
So
student.
what you gain in the first semester, and everybody's applauding recruitment, you're gonna wind up losing. So I'm just saying, and I know everybody knows that, but you know, it's sad.
It is.
no, but I think it speaks to the fact that, especially with financial literacy, we need to think, we do a lot of things, as you say, for our first-time freshmen. So that one may be something that we need to think about differently.
Sometimes financial literacy, or smart financial decisions, by a student and family, can run counter to the goals and missions of the institution. I'm just saying that in general, not saying that. No, I mean, if you really wanted to,
Yeah, no, you're right.
you know, have a high, like, we still don't have a high dorm population, but that was your goal as an
Right.
institution, have a lot of students living on campus, kind of like, you know, more like a TCP. You know, do you have a student body that can afford that? And do you have, you know, do you force students to sort of make decisions that aren't, you know, maybe the best interest of them? I mean, when I worked at Montclair State, we had a lot of the DOF, OSP students living on campus. You know, that meant that, I'll go the other way, when I worked at Ramapo College, they almost all lived on campus.
Mhm.
Some of that is largely, in Ramapo, that's a function of where the school is, and where the school is located. So they have to, so the institution then realizes there's a burden here, that we have to help the student, because this is a situation, a program, with a support program, and these students need to live on campus. You know, Montclair State was a little bit different. And you get into other things too, like, you know, where they're living, are they living in the single, are they living in expensive, that kind of stuff, so, sometimes, there's potential for somebody making a good, smart financial decision, not necessarily,
What we think of as the best practice.
yeah, or what, just, yeah.
That's really interesting. This has been great. Any other thoughts on this one, or any other ones that you've processed since we've started? So this is the last one there. We'll just show you the next one is design and delivery of student learning experiences. But before we let you go, I hope that you might be able to give us some feedback. So Virginia and I are trying to figure out, clearly we'd like a lot of participation at these. We've tried to schedule 2 for each one. We've tried to schedule them at times where we think faculty can come, or students can come, or staff, that kind of thing. But we were wondering what to do with these really rich discussions. And we sort of talked about maybe putting the highlights of them on a website. I don't know if you think that that would be useful investment of time. Again, we don't have specific outcomes, like we're not going to have people walk out of here with things to do, because this is really just to start the conversation. We're hoping you might, as you come to these, think, oh, what working group would I want to be on, sort of thing. I think we might take some of these ideas, especially if there's data that we can sort of gather when we start in fall to really kind of hit the ground running, so my office can do a lot of that. So we really appreciate, this has been really informative for me, but do you have any thoughts about?
You mentioned the website.
Right.
But if this is being taped, all you have to do, and if the tape is being kept for a while, all you have to do is on your website, have a link to go to this tape, and you don't have to create anything in terms of words unless you want an edited version.
Okay, that's a good thought. Any other things about how we don't want to lose this? You're taking your time here to give us your feedback and things like that. Perhaps.
Maybe you can share with your, like with your students. I mean, it is important for students. The biggest thing is because, if anyone, one of you, I know you were at the first session, the standards have changed from 14 to 7. So there's a lot of important information. And as we head into the fall and just begin to get into more work for the accreditation, I mean, we just want people to know what's going on, so they're informed, and when you actually start the work, that people are not surprised. So the more we can get the word out would be helpful. And this is the first time that we're actually doing the YouTube channel, so people can remote access in. So people from the School of Business and the Wall campus. So we try to engage, every area we can. But if you can share the information with your students or fellow colleagues, it would be helpful.
Yeah, I think something you said is really important. We don't want to think for the students, so we really do want the students to be involved too. So yeah, that's very helpful.
I'd recommend, if you haven't done it already with the students, contact, of course, SGO. There's a student leadership, I forget what they call themselves, but student leadership.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And then OSB has our student advisory board. And I'll try, if you send me something, I'll try to remember and send it to them, see if we get another group of them. Students have a very hectic week. I mean, we all do. But the students, good Lord Almighty, if they're not in class, they're working. If they're not working, they're taking care of their families. If they're not doing that, they sleep for an hour, eat lunch for an hour, and they're back. So I
Maybe we should
can
offer cookies.
understand,
No, but that's helpful. But your colleagues as well.
No, it's
Yeah.
good. But also like faculty and staff, we can get them. All right.
We thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Frank, it's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. And you got to say one word.
This is like what Tim shows, and this is like what it is.
Yeah, but I didn't go up there. I didn't do the dance.